Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Why 33% of Revenue Cycle Operations Had Payments Data Stolen. I am Morgan Hafner with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. We're looking forward to hearing your questions. We will also have a series of audience polling questions during today's webinar. When we reach each poll slide, the poll question will pop up automatically on your screen. Our speakers will give a few seconds for you to select an answer from the options on your screen and click Submit. A short webinar survey is also available in your doc. Please respond at any time during the webinar. Thank you in advance for your participation. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access that recording. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenters. Karen Ferguson is a director at Avalon working with Strategic Healthcare Partners. She is a 19-year veteran of the payments industry, holding multiple leadership positions in areas including client relations, product sales, product management, business development, and solution consulting. Her background has focused on value-added products, specializing in security, EMV, e-commerce, EHC, and electronic check processing. Karen has spent the last 7 years working with customers and partners to securely process transactions, leveraging her knowledge with PCI and data security. Karen just celebrated her 12-year anniversary with Avalon, and her latest roles included working with healthcare partners to integrate with Avalon, leveraging their comprehensive security solution, as well as consulting clients in multiple verticals on best solutions for meeting their security and e-commerce needs. Donna Stevens is the Director of Global Information Security at ACI Worldwide. Within her scope, she manages a team responsible for security vendor management, customer security contract reviews, customer assessments, security awareness, and governance and risk management. Prior to joining ACI, Donna worked 20 years at Bank of Boston's data center operations. And lastly, I'd like to introduce Mihaela Johnson, who is the Director of Product Management at ACI Worldwide. In this role, Mihaela leads product strategy for real-time payments and reimbursements. She also drives innovation for billing and payment solutions serving healthcare payers and providers. Mihaela has 16 years of product management experience in the financial services industry, including leadership roles at First Data, Western Union, and eBay. At this time, I'm pleased to turn the floor over to Mihaela to begin today's presentation.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for attending. Today's agenda is cake, and it's really about having your cake and eating it too. And what we're talking about here is risk reduction and raised revenue. So as part of our presentation today, we'll talk about why revenue cycle managers are making changes, how those changes are being made, top security threats, and how to ease PCI compliance. First, let's talk about revenue cycle management and how it must change. There's really two aspects of this. One is payment data is being stolen from healthcare providers. As you can see in this slide, in 2019, it's roughly 33%, a significant increase over what was seen in 2018 at 25%. The second reason is really most self-paid revenue is never collected, and I'm talking about SPIA here. And as you can see from a physicians group, the collections average is about 41%. It's even lower when you get to hospitals where it's 31%. So those are the reasons why revenue cycle managers and leaders are making changes now. What changes are they making? Well, first of all, they're tightening their security. That includes investing in new security and software and services, engaging with security experts, and placing greater limits on the data that employees can access, particularly customer data. Most revenue cycle operations are really focused on offering basic payment options, cash, card, and starting to grow in areas such as point-to-point encryption, mobile e-bill, targeted patient offers, virtual financial counseling or patient financial counseling, and pay by text. So right now we're going to have a very quick audience poll, which is really to give us insight on where you are interested in. Are you interested in point-to-point encryption, mobile e-bill, targeted patient offers, virtual patient financial counseling, or pay by text? I'm going to give everybody a few seconds to respond to that. So let's see how we're doing. Interesting. I assume that something's going on. I'm going to click back once and then click forward again and see if we can get the results. There we go. So very interesting results that we're seeing here. Very focused on pay by text, which is very one of the mediums that the different generations, particularly the younger generations, have gotten quite used to using. Virtual patient financial counseling is another area of interest, right along with mobile e-billing. So in moving forward, 85% of revenue cycle leaders are currently developing new payment options. And that's very interesting and very understandable when you start to evaluate and look at not only those security opportunities as well as those opportunities to collect additional funds. Some of the more efficient payment options that will support increased revenue, such as ease to understand the bill, payment plans where there are those needs, the ability for the patient to be able to get an estimate of what they're going to owe and actually have the ability to make prepayments, pre-date of service payments, as well as the ability for those patients to be able to negotiate the amount owed online. So it's very interesting to see those options and how they're being utilized. The next one is just more effective payment options can also increase speed of payment. Credit and debit card, of course, text message payments, text to pay, and even the text and email reminders are increasing the speed of which payments are received. Now I'm going to pass it over to Donna Tevens to talk about the top 7 security threats to the rev cycle.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mihaela. So there is so much opportunity, right, to take advantage of new products to help streamline processes and increase revenue. But it doesn't remove the need for all of us to continue to be vigilant in the cybersecurity war. Our CISO at ACI had prepared a presentation he called the Dirty Dozen. What we've done today is extracted 7 of the dirtiest to share with you. What we're hoping is that you can take something away from this part of the presentation, even if it's one new control or a conversation that you can take back to your companies that may help you to strengthen your security posture and deploy some mitigating controls. So before I jump in, we're going to just do another quick audience poll and just see which of these security technology topics you're all familiar with. So if you could just take a few seconds and answer that, and then we'll jump into the presentation. Let me go back, as Mihaela did, to see what we're getting for responses here. Oh, all right, great. So this is interesting. So a lot of focus, people are familiar with encryption and cloud. Probably both topics that resonate, some concern with people. And then the remainder we don't have a lot of focus on. So I'm happy to report that we will be going over the rest of these today and spend a little bit of time in that, and hoping that everyone, like I mentioned earlier, can walk away with a little something here. The first item is the Internet of Things attacks. So we have, as IT professionals and security professionals, we all know it is difficult enough for organizations to secure the known infrastructure, the traditional server, network, desktop environment. But now we have IoTs to worry about. This is a whole new playground for hackers and a vulnerable entry point to get into a hospital system. We don't typically think of securing them, and for many of them, they're not capable of even supporting endpoint security controls. For healthcare, you now need to think about so many of these devices, including things such as infusion pumps, CPAP machines, ongoing patient monitoring devices. So what do? What we can do now and make sure is that you are properly vetting your third-party IoT vendors carefully and ensure that they have security built in. When it comes to IoTs, it is so easy to get swept up in the glamour of the product, and they do some amazing things, but you really need to take the time to question the security controls. A few years ago, the U.S. FDA directed some hospitals, or all hospitals, to stop using a particular brand of an infusion system because it was being remotely hacked, and allowing the malicious user to actually control the device and change the dosage the pump delivered, which of course could lead to some serious consequences there. So, we really need to start paying attention to these IoTs and understand the significant impact they can have on our operation. California recently became the first state to approve an IoT security bill, and that will come into effect in 2020. And that law is intended to really, establish some minimum security standards for these devices going forward, and that will help address that. Apologize, of course, I have a little tickle in my throat here. The next one is encryption, and really the message here is we all know how important encryption is and necessary, but it is just one mitigating control. We don't want to be lulled into thinking that we're mostly covered if we have encryption in place. There are compliance requirements that will force necessary encryption. In the many layers of defense, this is but one that is required. When HIPAA was implemented in 2003, it didn't even mandate PHI data be encrypted, but much has changed since then. And of course, this is one of the obvious most best practices. But there are even implications if, the way you have to handle breach notification if your data was encrypted or not encrypted. So, this is just, the spirit of this slide is to say, don't get lulled into believing you're covered because you have encryption. The next item, and this is one that many of you were familiar with, is the cloud. This is not unique to healthcare providers. I imagine most of us are familiar with the recent breach between Cap One and their cloud provider, Amazon. That was a result of an Amazon employee, Paige Thompson, who was able to access the data of approximately 106 million accounts. And it was all because of a misconfigured firewall. Based on everything I've read, this was a preventable situation. In a cloud relationship, being very clear on process ownership is crucial. How you manage and perform assessments on that vendor is crucial. The decision to move to the cloud cannot be made on perceived cost savings alone. Cap One says it expects the Amazon breach to cost between $100 and $150 million. Clearly reading the contract and understanding roles and responsibilities, ownership for the security for the cloud is critical. It can come, entering a relationship with a partner in the cloud can come with significant benefits, but enter smartly and thoughtfully and with a vendor who can demonstrate the maturity of their software program and security program. Phishing is actually one of my favorite topics. Is sometimes so hard to comprehend how much damage one click on one phishing email can do to a company. The human factor is by far the weakest link. And phishing is the #1 vector for malicious actors. Since September of this year, there have been 5 separate healthcare providers that have reported potential patient data breaches caused by their employees falling victim to phishing email. Each of those incidents had similar hallmarks that could possibly help organizations prevent similar occurrences, but you really need to stay abreast of that. You need to understand when these phishing emails come into your industry, what they look like, because they often mimic each other. They're getting harder and harder to spot, but there are things that you can do to help your employees learn how to identify phishing email. At ACI, we've actually implemented a phishing program where once a quarter we test. We have a number of templates we use. We test every employee, including our ELT and including our board of directors, on a phishing email. The results of that test is shared with our senior leadership. In addition, it is shared quarterly with our board of directors. So we're fortunate to have an organization that understands, the serious consequences of this and making sure that employees are as prepared as possible to identify these. The next item here is around choosing your service providers carefully. Third-party vendors working with healthcare provider organizations accounted for more than 20% of breaches in the healthcare sector last year. The key to reducing vendor risk is understanding your inventory of vendors, ensuring you perform annual risk assessments. Organizations need to monitor post-contract signatures, not just for SLA operational metrics, but for security, privacy, and, general risk management considerations. The other thing that we tend, I think, to not think about a lot is ensuring that your third-party vendors have the appropriate cyber insurance coverage that they need. What we all have to make sure is that when we engage with a third-party vendor, that in that initial contract, we have the ability to go in and assess that vendor at least annually. I mean, as ACI, as both a customer and a vendor, we have a robust third-party vendor management program where we perform annual assessments on our third parties. But we also have a program where our customers come in and they do annual assessments on us. So you just have to make sure you have embedded in your contracts with these third-party providers the ability to perform these assessments and to ensure the language obligates these vendors to have strong security practices in place. All right, number 2 is patching. And, this feels so obvious, but scan, patch, repeat, scan, patch, repeat. This is not a glamorous job, but it's one of the most important BAU activities that needs to be built into your security program. It needs to be measured and reported. PCI requires quarterly scanning. ACI does monthly scanning. The results of our scanning is reported to senior leadership. It even makes its way to a weekly meeting attended by ACI's ELT and CEO. And I share that because I think one of the successes of this program is because it gets the right level of senior visibility. There are tools to help prioritize which vulnerabilities are deemed most important and to do correlation on that because it can be overwhelming to do scanning, get all of this data back and not be quite sure where to start your focus. So, here I think the important thing is to get senior leadership visibility and buy-in and recognize that there are tools out there to help weed through all the data from your scanning results. And lastly, we have malware. They say it's not if, but when we get breached, right? This is why all of the malicious actors show up at our door, is to try to break in and get their malware in. None of us can prevent a breach from happening 100%, but we can do a lot to help make it difficult for a malicious attacker, and we can minimize the impact. Again, I think senior leadership from your organizations need to be behind the urgency of cybersecurity. Most of us individually have already most likely been victims of a breach. I've got my free credit reporting for one breach my data was involved with. I think what happens too is that we start to get a little indifferent about these attacks because we consistently hear about them in the news, and we have to be careful we don't get to that place. So, I leave you with a few thoughts, and these are some simple ways for you to start to combat the cyber war. I would provide, and these are some best practices here we've done at ACI, but, make it easy for your employees to report anything suspicious. We maintain a button right on our intranet site. The phishing email program has, reduced significantly over the last 2 years that we've been doing this, the number of people that are still clicking on the link. And we have reporting and data to demonstrate that. Hospitals, as you may have heard in the news, have often been targets of ransomware. They make your systems inoperable and, look for a monetary reward. You have to always be careful that sometimes with ransomware, it's not just the reward they're looking for, but it's to, take focus away from the fact that they're still in your system trying to do something more nefarious than just a ransomware. Having a SIM, a Security Incident Event Manager program, eyes on glass 24/7, really helps to detect all that activity going on in your environment. Layers of defense, web application firewalls, IDS, IPS, DDoS services, all crucial elements of securing your security posture. DLP programs to make sure you can detect when sensitive data is leaving your company. And again, I think leadership commitment is so important. It gets you the budget, it gets the awareness. Even here at ACI, our CISO gets a seat at the table at every board meeting and is expected to provide an update on our security posture. So that is all I have for today. I'll turn it over to Karen and happy to answer any questions at the end here if you have any. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna. To piggyback off of you a bit, here we see some tried and true threats, and I'm hoping this is advancing, that continue to be used, like phishing, social engineering, malware, etc. There are two things, though, that continue to change. Cyber thieves are evolving the way they do their attacks, making them harder to detect, thereby making the more traditional type attacks successful. The other thing to keep in mind is that they are constantly creating new attacks. Ransomware is an example of a newer technique that is being used more and more, as you were mentioning, to take control over a computer and holding it hostage until the ransom is paid. It's fair to say that the better business get to protecting data, the more desperate these criminals get with their attacks and their ability to try new things. One of the things, and again, you touched on this, and the point that I like to make with this slide is there are really only two types of organizations, those that have been hacked and those that will be. Data continues to show that the attacks continue and are increasing. The average cost of a breach is $225 per card record compromise. According to the annual Kaspersky Lab Corporate IT Security Risk Survey, it costs $149,000 on average for small business and medium-sized businesses in North America who experience a data breach. For small SMBs, the most expensive cybersecurity incidents globally were related to IT infrastructure hosted by a third party, which cost $179,000 on average. For enterprises globally, the expense was related to targeted attacks and costing $1.64 million on average. Some common card not present data security and fraud solutions to be able to protect your environment would be avoid using public Wi-Fi or networks and use a VPN to connect to websites. Activate the appropriate firewall settings and use a strong router password. For increased malware infiltration, avoid downloading or opening attachments from unknown senders. Use updated security tools like antivirus and malware software. For cardholder identity theft and chargebacks, use verification tools like CCV, address, verified by Visa, etc. Know your customers and their habits and watch for any unusual activity. Common card-present data security fraud solutions would be avoiding default passwords and assigning user-level passwords and privileges. Use encryption and tokenization to protect card data being moved or stored. Avoid downloading opening attachments. Use updated computer security tools, as we mentioned in the card-not-present environment. For working with the identity theft and chargebacks in the card-present environment, use an EMV payment device to validate the card presented as authentic. Avoid bypassing prompts and instructions from that payment device. The payment card industry data security standard was developed to encourage and enhance cardholder data security and facilitate the broad adoption of consistent data security measures globally. PCI DSS provides a baseline of technical and operational requirements designed to protect against data. It applies to all entities involved in payment card processing, including merchants, processors, acquirers, issuers, and service providers. It also applies to all other entities that store, process, or transmit cardholder data and/or sensitive authentication data. One thing that I do like to point out as we discuss PCI is just because you have maintained compliance through the PCI Council does not mean that you are not at risk for breach. Going through an assessment is a very general overview of your environment to enhance those baseline are met. However, if a breach does occur, the audit that takes place after is much more in-depth, and the PCI Council does typically find where that breach occurs and places the fault where it is. When you're looking at a transaction, the lifestyle of a transaction, there are 3 points of vulnerability. At the point the transaction is taken, while the transaction is in transit, and while the transaction data is stored on the backside. We like to look at this so that you can address each of those points of failure with the appropriate security solution for a card-present environment. There are many misnomers about EMV in that when you integrate and begin using EMV that it's going to protect your card data. EMV really is the shift of liability from the card issuer to the merchant for fraudulent transactions in a card-present environment. It protects against the counterfeiting cards, and it creates a different point-of-sale experience for your customers. What people tend to misconstrue is that it is mandated to merchants. It is not. It is simply a shift of liability. They also feel that it protects against card-not-present fraud in e-commerce. EMV is not utilized in a card-not-present environment, only in a card-present. And that it prevents data breaches. EMV does not protect your environment from a data breach. The EMV chip technology requires a payment card with an embedded EMV chip and a payment device that can communicate with the embedded chip on the card. The two technologies talk to each other to authenticate the card presented in a card-present environment. It also helps to keep the customer's card in their own hands throughout the transaction. Card-not-present transactions like e-commerce and phone orders do not benefit from EMV fraud prevention capabilities since the card is not presented, nor is it processed using an EMV device. Encryption scrambles the cardholder data and uses advanced technology so that the data is protected at the point of entry and throughout the authorization process. I stress point of entry because if there is a handshake, then that transaction does become vulnerable, which is exactly what happened to Target many years ago. Encryption takes that card data, encrypts it the moment it interacts with the payment device, protecting the clear card data. It then transmits that data encrypted to your processor where it is securely passed along for authorization. All the encryption is done within the payment device to ensure that card data is protected immediately upon entry. Once the transaction is returned, then you can utilize tokenization. These leverage unique token IDs to replace sensitive card data before the authorization is returned back to the payment device. Since you would never want to return sensitive card data to the device, we must provide a token ID that will represent the payment card information so that it can be used for follow-up transactions like voids and adjustments. The token itself is useless outside of that business environment, making it worthless to a cyber criminal who is looking for reusable card data. Leveraging a semi-integrated environment reverse engineers the transaction is what people are used to today. So in today's environment, most of your point of interactions are enhanced from the actual point of sale to send the card data from the terminal back to the point of sale where it is then sent out to your processor. In a semi-integrated environment, that transaction is reversed. Rather than having the card data sent to the point of sale, the card data is entered into the payment entry device. It is encrypted at that point. The point of sale actually sends the transactional data to match up to that card data in the device. The card data is then sent to your gateway or your issuer directly. It stays encrypted until it's behind that firewall where it's decrypted. Your processor then submits it to an issuer for authorization, and a token is returned back to your point-of-sale environment rather than the actual card data. This alleviates two of the burdens that would fall upon your environment. One is it removes the burden of EMV, and it places that responsibility on the solution provider. You're able to maintain your point-of-sale environment and make changes without having to worry about additional and costly EMV certification. It also keeps any data from the environment completely. It bypasses your network and goes directly out to your processor. We've covered some of these points as we've talked about performing a security assessment with your PCI QSA, choosing the right partners, also mentioned earlier, but critical to a successful project. They need to be committed to choosing the right solution, establishing realistic expectations. Find a provider with a complete solution with project management and technical resource support who has solid experience and long-term support plan for your solution. And lastly, prepare your business. The right solution provider can likely assist you with the resource organization and communications that you will need from your internal team. Some tips for avoiding some common mistakes with PCI audit. Understand the importance of the PCI DSS in the processing environment. Use your merchant processor as a resource. Create a policy of reviewing devices on a regular basis to ensure they've not been tampered with. Take it seriously and assume a data breach is inevitable. Have proper processes in place and be ready. Perform quarterly scans if applicable. This is the most preventative measure available to detect vulnerabilities. Some suggested fraud prevention filters in the e-commerce environment would be the whitelist and blacklist, IP whitelist, mobile ID number whitelist, billing country blacklist, shopping country blacklist. Other ones are IP and address mismatches, IP address and shipping mismatches, email domains, transaction timeout, daily hourly velocity parameters, and hourly velocity parameters by IP address, and autopay. Finally, make the most of your project. This is one of those times that while you have the patient open, what can you do to upgrade your payment environment? Let's consider 4 compelling benefits. Top of the list, and by far the number one benefit, is security. If you haven't yet implemented encryption, consider that as a top priority. By implementing the EMV and layered security, customers will be able to eliminate storing sensitive cardholder data within their POS or PMS environment, protecting data in transit, at rest, and against card fraud. Regards PCI compliance. By removing cardholder data from the POS or PMS, the reduced exposure streamlines much of the PCI compliance process as it relates to resource, time, and effort. There are payment applications that can reside outside of your POS PMS that will help you to achieve this goal. A third key benefit is the future-proofing and liability shift that this brings. Both magnetic strip and EMV cards can be supported, providing coverage for the scheduled liability shift when businesses are liable for fraudulent card transactions if they are not EMV. That took place in 2015. You may want to discuss your mobile wallet or contactless payment strategy at this point also. One desire for many customers is to reduce the complexity of establishing and maintaining their payment environment. Look for a strong solution partner. And to close, improving your payments experience. Implement EMV at all your point-of-sale outlets and locations. Implement encryption and tokenization. Choose a strong provider that can implement a payment security system across platforms. Utilize 3D Secure for your online transactions. 3D Secure creates an authentication data connection between digital merchants, payment networks, and financial institutions. The new 3D Secure 2.0 enables a real-time, secure information sharing pipeline that merchants can use to send an unprecedented number of transaction attributes that the issuer can use to authenticate customers more accurately without asking for a static password or slowing down e-commerce. Mahela, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. So, in summary, folks, we get back to the cake analogy, right? Revenue cycle leaders are having their cake and eating it too. They're reducing risk and raising revenue all at the same time. And with that, again, this is to look for opportunities to help minimize data loss, right? And those potential breaks that are not only harmful to your customers, they're harmful to your brand, they ultimately cost, as Karen noted it quite clearly, they can be quite expensive. But it's also the opportunity to increase the amount of revenue that you're able to bring in by having those additional payment methods that your consumers, your patients really want to have. Whether that's, point of sale devices that are EMV devices to help them feel more confident, as well as having as Karen referred to, the encryption and the tokenization that also helps minimize and secure the back end once the data is in the system. It's really that whole entire life cycle when it comes to point of sale transactions that really can help minimize PCI. You can never fully, as Karen mentioned, you can never fully mitigate it. There's always somebody out there that's going to try something new or different, but there are opportunities to minimize it. And with that, again, the ability to collect additional revenue through those additional payment options, if you will. Talk about payment plans, where we talked about online ability to negotiate the amount due by that particular payment. Being able to have virtual financial counselors available for your patients that they can communicate with and work with at their convenience on their time is also another great opportunity for you. And then, getting back to, and I think the revenue and these revenue cycle leaders that are on this call recognize just by the percentage of them that are actually already currently in development of new payment methods and options. And so with that, as a summary of today, I want to thank everybody for their time, and I'm going to actually hand it back. I'm actually going to ask the next polling question, my apologies, is when would you like to actually talk to somebody in sales with about reducing your risk and about raising your revenue. Immediately, 2 weeks, 1 month, 6 months. Go ahead and answer that as you have time. And I'm now going to pass it back over to the moderator, but I do want to thank everybody for their time today.
Well, I want to thank Karen, Donna, and Mihaela for that fantastic presentation. We'll now begin today's question and answer session. So if you haven't already, please submit any questions you have by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your dashboard. We'll try to get through as many questions as we have time for. And we're getting a great response from the audience. And this first question is directed toward you, Karen. The audience member is curious, does my company have to prove PCI compliance if it doesn't store credit card data?
Any company that accepts credit cards is required to prove PCI compliance. Your processor and partners should be able to help you, and your provider should be requiring you to submit that information annually. Depending on the size you are would be how in-depth that questionnaire and scan review would be.
Excellent, Karen. Thank you for breaking that down. Another audience member is curious and is asking Donna's opinion on this. So among the top 7 threats that you've mentioned, what would you suggest would be the #1 priority to focus on?
So assuming we're going into an environment with no control, encryption is crucial. Karen mentioned it. As long as that data is encrypted, despite whatever else is going on, it won't be able to be seen. I think a scanning and patching program is the next best level of defense. So you don't know where your gaps are unless you are scanning regularly and patching. And then I think, phishing is, I throw that in there because that's an easy control for companies to deploy. And I don't want to minimize the amount of effort it takes to do that, but it's a pretty straightforward program for you to be able to deploy to really get a handle on helping your employees not fall victim to a phishing email.
Thanks so much, Donna. That's really helpful for understanding. And we do have only time for one more audience question today, and this one is posed to anyone who would like to answer it. And an audience member is curious, do you have to fulfill PCI DSS requirements if you only take credit card information by phone?
I can take that if you'd like. Taking transactions by phone actually add additional security concerns. It is typically done in a non-secure environment unless an IVR is implemented where transaction data is not encountered by any of your representatives. But any transaction that is taken and processed through your environment, whether it is by phone, in person, mailed in, or e-commerce, ends up resulting in PCI requirements to be able to be met.
Just excellent. Thank you so much for Karen for weighing in again on the audience question. And before we wrap up today, I really would like to give each of you a chance to address any final thoughts you have. So Karen, Donna, and Mihaela, if you have anything additionally you would like to share with the audience, please do so.
This is Donna. Just, there's a lot of things, like I mentioned earlier, none of us can 100% prevent an attack or loss of data, but we can, do a lot of things to really minimize the ability for that to happen and to minimize the scope if it does happen. So I just, really encourage people to really think through some of the things that we talked about today to try to minimize that, as they say, potential breach for all of us.
Donna, to add an analogy to what you were just describing, you're exactly right. Just like there's burglars in every city that we live in, there are hackers all over the world. And a burglar is going to go and look at the houses that have the least amount of protection. And that's the house that they're going to target. It's much easier for them to get in. There's less obstacles for them to overcome and less likely for them to be caught. Hackers do the same thing. So just like you have a big dog barking at your door, have your security solution in place to discourage them and have them move on to the next less secure organization.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Karen. And I think the other thing that I would add is that, we want to give our customers the options and the flexibility that they have, but we also want to make sure that they're comfortable and confident when they do provide their financial sensitive information, that we've done our due diligence to mitigate as much as possible. And with that, you increase loyalty over time, and ultimately that will increase your revenue as well.
Those are such great points from you all and really, truly important information for everyone listening today. So I would want to thank you again, Karen, Donna, and Mihaela, for your excellent presentation, and also ACI Worldwide for sponsoring today's webinar. ACI Worldwide will be joining us this October for Becker's Health IT and Revenue Cycle Management Conference. So please stop by booth 509 at the show. And a quick reminder to please fill out the survey before closing out of this webinar. Please do enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.